Welcome back, everybody. I was just saying to our next guest that it is like Christmas for me to have him here, and it really is, because I have with me the one and only Bill Binney, ex-technical director of the NSA and world-renowned whistleblower. Welcome to the Unity for J stream again, Bill.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Bill, I could talk to you for days on end if I had the chance, but I only have an hour with you, so I'm going to try to cover as much ground as possible.
Okay.
I do want to talk to you about your personal experience in the NSA and about trying to decipher some of what is going on around us in the world at the moment. But first of all, I'm really conscious that while we're sitting here enjoying each other's company, Julian is not. He is alone in the embassy. I was wondering if you could lead into this interview by telling us about how you came across WikiLeaks, what drew you to them and to Julian's work, and what you believe their significance is.
Well, I think it really starts out with the experience I had with NSA and when they started going to the dark side, going to the evil side. And when I first found that out, of course, I knew from that Hayden had taken his orders from the White House and was following it, because there was no other way they could do that and violate the Constitution and risk jail time for many years, without having cover from above. So I didn't even bother talking to those people. I just got out of there and went straight to Congress, because they're supposed to be the counterbalance, the check for the administration, and make sure they're, abiding by primarily the Constitution and the laws of the country. Well, when they, of course, failed, it was clear that they were in on it too. This is one of the problems I noticed when Craig Murray was on earlier. He was talking about all this evil coming out of this government. Well, it's because they all are a part of this process, and it's all based on it's fundamentally what we're calling over here the shadow government and the deep state. This is those who have vested interests in all the corruption and all the criminality that's involved in war making and warmongering around the world. I mean, that's really what's all behind us. Everybody has so much invested in it and is getting so much out of it. They all have to try to stand up to defend it. And anybody like Julian who comes out and starts exposing this, I mean, good heavens, they have to attack him. They can't let him stand. They have to destroy him. So that's really what it's all about. And it's not just in England, it's in the United States, the Five Eyes, and there's about 9 other countries that are involved in all of this. So, it doesn't surprise me that this is like, for example, in the United States, when the NSA went to Quest, the CEO of Quest, Joe Naccio, and tried to get him to turn over all his data on his people, he refused unless they gave him a warrant signed by a judge, which was the proper thing to do by the law. And of course, then after that, they came after him and fabricated evidence and put him in jail for 5 years. Well, that set the precedent. Here's what happens to you if you're a CEO of a telecom or a ISP and you don't go along and do what we say. This is what we're going to do to you. I mean, I know Joe. I met him. I talked to him. He said they fabricated evidence against him. I said, I believe that because they did that to us. The difference is that I caught them at it and he didn't. Now, that meant he went to jail and we didn't. So, but I mean, it's clearly the technique is they will do whatever it takes to silence anybody who opposes them. And that's what they're doing to Julian. And other public publishers and people who are in the news business, they're experiencing some of this also. If you remember Jim Risen and Rosen and the Associated Press, they all got attacked one form or another. Jim Risen was threatened with a grand jury, and charges and things like that, unless he revealed his sources. So, this is the kind of thing that they're realizing. It's like I liken it to, if you ever walked in the woods and you see a rock sitting on the ground that's been there for a while, and you lift it up and the sun is shining, you see all the bugs and worms squirm to get out of the sunlight. That's what these people are. That's exactly how they operate. They want to be in the shadows, unknown, and no one is supposed to know them. Anybody that exposes the sunlight on them, they need to attack and stop. And that's really what Julian is facing. I mean, we faced it here, and I keep attacking them publicly here in the United States and around the world because that's what they're doing and that's what they are.
I couldn't agree with you more. Based on my personal experiences of one of the second tier partners agencies, which has been the equivalent tyrannical organisation in my home country of New Zealand.
Yep.
So the NSA, I've been studying now with Elizabeth Lear-Voss, the editor-in-chief of Disobedient Media, for the last several years. We've been studying the Snowden files live online in a series called Decipher You. And we've been really, we call it mining the gems hidden in plain sight. We're really going through these documents, looking for the stories that have not been picked up on and have not been reported on. And there is so many of them that we have discovered extremely significant, that have extremely significant ramifications. And just what you were saying before about the resistance to oversight that the NSA has, we uncovered multiple instances of NSA taking actions to do exactly that, to avoid oversight. So I wanted to just show you one example quickly and have you comment on it. So here we have a document from inside the NSA where an NSA manager is telling the entire NSA workforce that the Senate Intelligence Committee investigating the 9/11 attacks should not be allowed to implement any changes or force any changes on the agency. He says the congressional committees investigating the attacks of September 11th, the 9/11 Commission and the Senate Intelligence Committee have all complained that NSA overclassifies too much information. My worry, his worry, is that a consensus is building within Congress that they need to take action to deal with this problem. He says, trust me, we don't want that. We need to address this issue. So the solution is one of our creation and not one that is imposed on us from the outside. Could I just get your comment on that? Is this typical of the attitudes that you saw within the agency and particularly in the management structure?
Yes, after you reach a certain level, I would say about G as 15 and above. At that point, they figure they're above the law and they can do just about anything they want. And according to Russ Tice, one of the whistleblowers from NSA, he even saw documentation of them spying on all the people who have oversight of them, like the members of Congress, House and Senate, the intelligence committees, especially. Also, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Chief Justice and all the other justices of the Supreme Court, plus federal judges around the country, and the White House. He included saying that he had read transcripts of phone conversations by the then Senator Obama. So the point is that they're spying on everybody that has any kind of influence or potential influence over them, so that they can be prepared to deal with it. When they raise issues in front of them, they're prepared to answer them, to kind of direct them down the path they want them to go. And they also have the ability to feed them information that will help them direct them down that way, because they're responsible for about 70% of the intelligence produced for the entire United States government, of all departments. So that helps them feed them the right information so that they can make the right decision.
That's something that's really interesting, because we had kept likening the NSA spying machine, for want of a better term, to like the Eye of Sauron. And because this is very much how we feel, it is really like the evil Eye of Sauron. But we were wondering who directs it, who is actually directing where the Eye of Sauron is going to look into. And we found two things. One, we discovered that who is directing the Eye of Sauron is the NSA's customers, and that they have a customer information needs portal where they log their information needs requests at NSA, telling them who to spy on and what information to get. And when we looked into who those customers were, we discovered that some of those customers are not even government departments of the US government. For example, the Federal Reserve Bank was one of those customers.
Yeah. Yes, but that's the open set of people giving them tasks. That doesn't count the internal tasks from the management of NSA or CIA or FBI and the collaboration they've been involved with over the decades to do that. So that this is basically what I call the Praetorian Guard. These are the agencies who have the control over and this is what Senator Schumer was talking about when he said that President Trump should not be attacking the intelligence community because they've got 6 ways to Sunday to get to you. These are the people who can do that. You know, these are the people who have all that information and the targeted data that has been collected on all the major players in the government, as well as state governments too, and federal judges and everybody in the United States. So they've got the information to use to manipulate people. And that's why I refer to them as the Praetorian Guard. So, but they're the ones behind the scenes doing this kind of stuff, and they make up their own rules. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's stated by other customers, whether it's Commerce Department, you know, State Department, or any of the other departments of government. They feed in the open forum, you know, a bunch of requirements and tasks. That doesn't deal with the secret ones that are built up internally and shared by those 3 agencies.
Right, that's fascinating, because then our next question was, well, who are the customers of the customers? Because, for example, one customer was the Department of Agriculture, and we're sitting there going, what in the hell do the Department of Agriculture need access to NSA spying for? And then we click, who is the customer of the Department of Agriculture? Monsanto. Yep. So is this the process by which this top secret information is coming from this military apparatus and making it all the way through the food chain to the corporations, to the private companies?
Yeah, you see, this is getting into what's called the deep state over here. This is called the deep state. This is where all the companies, actually, NSA is outsourcing a good deal of their responsibilities to contractors who are, you know, divisions of some of these companies like TRW, Booz Allen, all those, and Boeing, who also have other departments doing other business. And so they have the ability then to look at all the NSA data collected on all the people who are competing with them in the world, see everything they're planning, like in terms of bidding for contracts or things like that. They could see that, and they would have that ability then to feed that information to their division that might be interested in knowing that in advance. So it could help them in terms of winning contracts. So it's called military or industrial espionage committed by contractors involved in supporting the national security of the United States. And the free world, of course.
Fascinating that you should bring up those contractors, because that takes us to yet another document that we studied, which is about the Trailblazer Project. So in this, we learned that ex-deputy director of the NSA, Bill Black, was in charge of the Trailblazer Project. $1.2 billion Trailblazer contract, and it was awarded to Bill Black's former employer. The project ran years over time and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. And as a direct result, Black was then promoted to acting director of the NSA. And there's the reference for it for anybody who wants to see it.
Well,
so this is the culture that, first of all, that he could give have a $1.2 billion project awarded to the company that he'd just come to the NSA from, and then run years over time and hundreds of millions of dollars over budget and be promoted.
Now, see, what you're listing there is the publicly available figure for that program. It's about 1/6 of the real value. It was over $8 billion. So, I mean, that was the start. I mean, the original start was the request for $3.8 billion for a 5-year program in 1999 or 2000. That was the initial request, $3.8 billion. Then that doubled, and after that, it doubled again because of after 9/11. I mean, after 9/11, it was amazing. Congress came out to NSA and said, here's a blank check, you fill in the amount. I mean, and according to my calculations, since 9/11, the United States government alone has spent $1 trillion on intelligence. That's 1,000 billions.
Oh my gosh.
So this is what's behind what they have to do to silence people. They can't afford to have people telling the truth about it, because it makes them look so bad. I mean, and greedy and all kinds of things come to mind as to I mean, when Dick Cheney said we had to go to the dark side, since then I've been calling him Darth Cheney because, you know, he started this evil and he was kind of the central figure for it. But, you know, Bush was along and Hayden and Tennant were the others who were involved in setting it up to begin with. So those four were the core people in the beginning. And of course, there are lawyers, Addington, you, and all that at the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, and the DOJ. The DOJ went along with all of this in spite of the fact that they knew all this was unconstitutional. All the stuff they started was unconstitutional. And the same was true with the intelligence committees. They all went along to begin with, just the leadership in them. They were the first ones that, you know, briefed into this. So only the four of them, the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. And I would point out that at the time, the ranking member in the House Intelligence Committee that later became the Speaker of the House. And she's from San Francisco, you know, one of our very liberal places. So she was involved, Nancy Pelosi was involved from the very beginning and agreed to these programs. So that's why when she became Speaker, she said that impeaching George Bush was off the table. Because if she said you're going to impeach George Bush and allowed it to go forward in the House, that's the process over here. House does the, votes to impeach. Senate does the trial. So if she let that go forward, why George Bush could say, hey, you know, you're part of this, so you have to impeach yourself too. That's how they gained leverage over the Congress. They pulled those four people in, then they pulled in the leadership, then senior and ranking members, and then the House and the Senate. So that with those 8 people, they had basically leverage on the entire Congress. Those are the people who controlled what happened in Congress, what came to the floor, what got voted on, all of that. So it's how you corrupted a democracy, and those guys did it from the very beginning. They did it very slowly, over a long period of time, and letting it get out very slowly to the courts. Like the FISA court didn't even know about some of this program until February of 2002, 4 months after it had started.
So, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Well, I was saying, and then they tried to, they tried later on to have Admiral Poindexter come out with his TIA program, Total Information Awareness Program, just to test the waters, to see how the rest of Congress and the country would take it. This was in 2003. Of course, everybody violently was opposed to it because it's clearly violating the Constitution. So it got killed right away. But the reason they did that was because they'd already been doing that with the programs I left them from 2001 inside NSA. That was already running. So this was like to test the waters. If it was acceptable, because we could use the excuse of 9/11, then, hey, they could do that. Well, it went down rather badly at that time because, people realized very clearly this was unconstitutional, illegal, all kinds of things, And so, and besides, that would give those intelligence agencies and anybody in power and government all the information about them to use to leverage them in anything they were doing. So,
So we also learned on that same tack from studying the documents that there is something called the Congressional Liaison Office inside the NSA.
Yeah, liaison office, yeah.
And that the liaison office acts as the gatekeeper to the reporting to Congress. And there are documents in the Snowden files which are warning NSA employees, don't you dare ever have any contact with anybody even vaguely related to the Congress without going through these specific people at the Congressional Liaison Office. And they even say in the documents that all of the reporting and financial reporting also has to be cleared by that office, lest there be adverse impacts on the budget request to Congress. They actually state that it is so that in case the communication results in less money.
But let me tell you, it's even worse than that, because I've gone through this process with the liaison office. And what it is, when Congress comes out and they say they want to talk about certain subjects or they want updates on certain programs, what that means is the people involved in those programs develop a briefing that they're going to present to the congressional staff when they come out to hear it. But before they can do that presentation, they have to go through the legislative liaison office and get it approved. so that they can then, the liaison office can filter what is told to Congress. In other words, it's a way of covering up or making sure that Congress doesn't necessarily hear the whole truth. This is that partial truth kind of thing, that that's one of the ways that they have to ensure that the right words are said so that their objectives can be achieved in other areas, you see. And so this is the liaison office. This is the one office that tries to coordinate that all over, and it does all the pre-briefing, scanning, and everything, and ensuring that people say only the right thing to Congress.
We found yet another document which said that don't worry if you can't get the money that we want from Congress, because you can just apply to the NSA corporation. And there is actually a separate entity. In fact, I'll just share this with you because I think you'll find this incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, it's called discretionary funds, yeah.
Sorry. Right, so just in this one stream that we did, we discovered that the NSA had wanted to influence the architecture of strategic development of new technologies in the corporate and commercial sphere years ahead of time, that they were monitoring other spying efforts by the intelligence community. So they were spying on spies, basically, and that they have a separate funding entity called the NSA Corporation. And as if that wasn't all enough, we also found that they can directly access hardware and networks of foreign spy agencies and their satellites.
Yes.
So they could, if you could shine any light for me on the NSA Corporation, that's something we searched the entire internet trying to find out more information, and we can't find anything other than what's in the Snowden documents.
Well, it's like if you're the head of NSA, and you get a budget every year, you take a slice off the top as reserve funding for your discretionary use.
Discretionary spending.
And I believe that was 10%. So they take 10% of the budget, something like that, and keep it in reserve for any purpose the director said he had for it. So that's been, it's called discretionary spending. I think it's one of the ways they referred to it. Also, the chief's operational options, or something like that. They would refer to that. But at any rate, everybody knew it was the reserve funds that was
the slush fund, basically.
Yeah, right. The slush fund, yeah.
Right. And then what about the money that NSA actually earns from its foreign customers? For example, in the Snowden reporting on files relating to New Zealand spy agencies, it proved there was a two-way cash flow, whereby GCSB in New Zealand, our NSA in New Zealand, was paying the NSA for services, and the NSA were paying GCSB as well for services.
Sure, yeah. And, for example, if in England you take the Bude facility doing the wiretaps on the transoceanic cables coming across the Atlantic, the NSA, I believe, gave about $250 million to build that facility. They also built the facility in Menwith Hill, and of course GCAQ is there too, and they're integrated and assisting there. But it's really a joint effort, and since 9/11, been mostly paid by the U.S.
And the US retains ownership of those facilities, which I know from the New Zealand situation, where we discovered that the Southern Cross Cable landing point, the physical landing point, was at a facility that was registered as on the infrastructure reporting for the USA as a US facility. And my country didn't even know that there was these US spy facilities on our soil in our country.
Wait a minute.
Without Snowden, we would never have known that.
That's the general public you're talking about.
Yes, yes. Those of us who've never been in.
Or somebody like that, why the prime ministers know. I mean, like Chancellor Merkel, when she made that, big hullabaloo about her phone being tapped. Well, she knew all this was going on. She knew it as well as the BND, certain members of the BND and a few members of the parliament. Or her assistants or her staff, her staff knew that this was an agreement made with the United States, that they would take that data provided by the BND and or taps on the fiber lines inside Germany on data on German citizens and pass it off to NSA for storage. And then by the way, B&D can use the XT score program to interrogate that database. So, you know, it's an international two-way street agreement by all the parties who are involved, and that's all the Five Eyes and I think about 9 other countries so far, in Japan, Germany, you know, Poland, you know, Denmark, I think, and also I know the Austrians were trying to get involved too with this bulk data collection. So, but their parliament.
The Netherlands are pushing.
Yeah. Well,
the people are pushing back, but the spy agency has been taking meetings at NSA for years about how they can put through legislation to retroactively legalize what I'm sure they're already doing behind.
Well, that's exactly the technique, is to retroactively legalize it. That's why the telecoms, George Bush fought to get the telecoms retroactive immunity in 2008 before he left office, because, you know, they were in violation of all kinds of the Constitution, any number of laws, the Electronic Privacy Act, Electronic Security Act, you know, the pen register laws, all kinds of things in the United States. But for violations of that nature, of the privacy rights of their customers, the penalty was $5,000 and 5 years in jail, up to 5 years in jail for each occurrence. Well, they were doing 3 billion occurrences every day. So that would put them out of business in the first week, you know. So,
God, and so then
George Bush and Cheney had to protect them, is what happened, and that's the way they tried to do it. And they wouldn't tell Congress, most of the Congress, what they were giving them retroactive immunity for. And I was here trying to go down there and testify. I couldn't get in to talk to those people because they wanted to maintain plausible deniability. So, and in other words, if I went down there and testified as what it was all about, they could no longer deny it, you know? And so they'd have to face up to it and face their constituents on what they did. This way, if they couldn't hear it or didn't hear it, they could claim, well, I didn't know, you know, I was just one of the confused, lied to people, you know, just like you know. But otherwise, you know, they basically know that this is going on. I mean, for God's sake, since Snowden, they should know. I mean, I've been out there telling them and explaining what these slides mean from Snowden. They really show all the corruption and all the connections in the world that are going on, plus all these fiber optic taps all over the world and implanted software and hardware and all kinds of switches and servers. The one slide Snowden had greater than 50,000 implants in these switches and servers around the world. That means they own the entire network. And so that means that
they state so in their documents very clearly that their end game, they would say they want visibility over every inch of the planet.
Yeah, and the Treasure Map program says they want to know where every device is on the network every minute of the day. So, and the way they were doing that was using trace route programs, you know, all the GPS reporting, all of that kind of stuff on all the devices.
And so I think the public, the civilians, we think that the spy agencies work for our country, work for our population, that they work to their founding charter. And so one of the things that Elizabeth and I tried to find out is, well, where, you know, what's in the charter for the NSA? What were the boundaries that they were originally established for them? Who is it that sets their policy? Who is it that decides what they can and can't do? And thanks to the amazing work of James Bamford from must be now nearly 40 years ago, we were able to discover that actually the power was vested almost solely in the director of the NSA to create policy and directives, signals intelligence directives for the National Security Agency. The only caveat to that is that there's something called a Judicial Review Board, and the Judicial Review Board is not really judicial at all. It's made up of, I think it was 7 or 9 votes. 2 votes of the head of the State Department, which most recently would have been Hillary Clinton, 2 votes for the Pentagon, 1 vote for the CIA, and 1 for each of the military branches. And a majority rule on that means that if Pentagon and State are in each other's pockets with CIA, it actually doesn't matter what any of the military branches say. The NSA will always be upheld and protected no matter what. So then we found another document in the Snowden files, and I'll just quickly show you this reference. In this document, the NSA discovered that their analysts had been doing things for which no intelligence directive existed. So what do you think they did about that? They decided that they would write directives for what they had already been doing after the fact, just as you were just saying.
Yep.
So they found their current operational, the quote is, their current operational processes were inadequately covered in the signals intelligence directives from the director, resulting in new draft directives and revisions of the existing directives. So that was their response, was to just make new rules for what they'd already been doing.
And that doesn't cover all the things they're doing, because there's certain things they're doing they will not write about. Okay, like the spying on the U.S. government itself, they don't write that up. That just happens in the quiet little dark corners in the NSA, and very few people are involved, and very few people know about it, and they never write anything about it. So that's why I said publicly, no government in the world has any absolute control over any intelligence agencies they create. Because those agencies, once created, they create that secret environment and they close the doors, and then they'll the only thing the governments can hear is what they tell them outside those secret doors, which is their choice. So in other words, they can feed whatever information they want to their own governments, which is the case that's happened in Germany. It happened in, well, for example, when I came over to England to testify to the House of Lords, I was there 2014, I believe it was, and 2014 or 15, anyway. I was over there because Duncan Campbell wrote a little article. He asked me about it because we were at a conference together over in Brussels. And he asked me about some of the comments that were made by GCHQ and their lawyers to the Parliament in the UK, where they said to them, they said, we cannot separate your communications out from all the bulk collection we're doing simply because there's just too much of it. You know, there's just too much. We can't separate out. So we have to take in your data and store it for a period of time. Well, then they pass it all off to the NSA to store for God knows how many years, you know. So they have at least 5 years, 5 to 10 years storage over there. The NSA maintains that they can interrogate, okay? And then it doesn't distinguish between children or adults, parliament, or anything else. Just everything is taken in and stored. And yet, and this was the documentation I gave to the House of Lords. I gave them the actual documentation of the specific specs for all the equipment they were using to capture and store the data. And that was with the NARIS device up front to sessionize and reconstruct all the communications. That will reconstruct, one of those devices, the Insight device, will reconstruct everything on a 10 gigabit line. Everything. Not distinguishing between anything. It will give you everything coming across the line. So it also gives them the capability to selectively remove or pick out certain things in that database. So if you knew all the lists of phone numbers or all the IPs or whatever for all the parliament members, all you'd have to do is say, give it to the NARIS device and say, we don't want any of this. And it would simply remove it online as it came down the line. So that technology was available as early as 2002. Okay, so fundamentally, GCHQ and their lawyers were lying to their parliament, and yet people in parliament, they just assumed that it's true, and it's not. These people lie to them all the time. I mean, the NSA lies to our government all the time. I witnessed it. I mean, I had to, when I was in NSA, you know, I was still doing some of my projects, you know, and some people didn't want me telling them certain things. And so I looked at them, and this was in a meeting, and I said, I will not lie to anybody for anybody. And so I didn't get many requests to attend meetings after that. So.
Well, I've seen it myself, and we had the Prime Minister of New Zealand, after our spy agency had been caught illegally targeting 88, well, they say 88, it's probably more like thousands, 88 New Zealand citizens in total violation of their charter.
All of them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you go 2 hops in New Zealand and you've got everybody pretty quickly anyway, even if it was 88 targets.
Actually, 2 hops and you got everybody in the planet.
he stood up and told our country and the press that the primary function of the GCSB was to act like Norton antivirus, that they were the antivirus checker for all of the email in New Zealand.
Okay. Yep. Well, that means you have to collect it all, right? And they're storing it. They give it to NSA and they store it. So see, that way they don't have to pay for all the storage facilities. I mean, we build, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million square foot storage facilities now. So, we keep it all. And what that means is that everybody does a lot of work for free for NSA, so they can have it for over long periods of time, so that gives them the ability to come in and retroactively analyze any of the data on their citizens or anybody they want.
Absolutely, and sure enough, we discovered some years later that those 88 targets were referred by the GCSB to the NSA in Hawaii in 2012. We had a ruling thanks to a Green Party MP, Keith Locke in New Zealand, sued them through the Privacy Commissioner and forced a ruling whereby if someone asked the government whether they were one of the people who had been illegally targeted and passed to the NSA, and the person was not one of them, the government had to tell them. I went ahead and put my request in the wake of that ruling, and they came back and said they were unable to confirm or deny, which basically means by default that yes, I was one of those 88 people, which I'm particularly aggrieved about, funnily enough. However, like you, I like to kick the stuffing out of them on a daily basis so that they don't ever get to forget that what they did was immoral and egregious and what they continue to do every single day. Yeah. I'd just like to take this back to where we were at the beginning of this conversation.
Okay. All right.
Where you said that they hate sunlight, that they want total deniability, that they're the little insects that scurry away into the dark corners. Well, having just seen some of the sunlight that's arisen from the documents that Snowden gave us, can you now explain to the viewers really what the significance is of Snowden's disclosures, which isn't just that we're being spied on, but the societal implications? And secondarily, what then the impact is of Julian Assange having saved Snowden's life?
Let me. There's a number of questions there. Let me try to get started. First of all, the Snowden material that he released and brought out, he did that. See, I didn't feel I had to take anything out because once I walked out of there, I was the guy who created most of those programs. So I already knew how the programs were and how they operated and I actually knew how the software operated, and I could explain that to anybody at any level. And so I didn't feel I needed to take anything out so I could go to Congress. And I mean, Congress knew who I was and what I was doing there. So they knew that. So I didn't need any documentation. But Snowden, once he brought the documentation out and put it in the public domain, that was very important for me because it now gave me the ability to talk about those programs in public. Because here was something in the public domain that I could use and say, you see, that's what I've been talking about that they're doing, and they're doing this to everybody in the country and everybody in the world, and that gave me that leverage to use that. Well, after I started doing that, 2 weeks after I started that here in the United States, Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, I have other words for him, but at any rate, I know the man, okay? I know him personally. I had him under contract at NSA. That's another story. But at any rate, he came out and said, and issued a letter saying that no current or former employees of the intelligence community are permitted to talk about any of the material from Edward Snowden. And I answered him in the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. After I stated that what he was declaring, I said, I do not give up my First Amendment right to talk about anything in the public domain, Mr. Clapper. Thank you. And I never heard from him since. Because he was trying to directly, violate my constitutional right to talk about it. And since Edward put it out there, that gave me the freedom to say, see, that's what I've been talking about. That's what that means, And so I can explain it in public and do it without fear because that's my First Amendment right. And besides, there's another little thing over here I keep mentioning to everybody. Executive Order 13526 governs the entire classification of all the U.S. government. And that's signed by the president. I mean, the president's the guy who determines what's what. Well, section 1.7 of that says you cannot classify, maintain classified, or not declassify anything that is evidence of a crime, corruption, fraud, waste, or embarrassment to an individual or an agency. Well, and a few other things. Those were the main ones. But that allowed me to say, well, hey, the Fairview program, where they have all the taps on U.S. citizens, is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and a violation of any number of laws. So you must declassify that. But they haven't done that yet. They're still trying to hide it. So I keep trying to get somebody in the mainstream media over here to publish that, and they won't do it. They won't show it on air because it makes an obvious lie out of what they've been telling everybody. So that they're after foreigners? No, they're not. It's distributed with the population of the United States. Well, that means the target is the population of the United States. If they wanted foreigners, there were 11 points on that program where the transoceanic cables come up on the surface of the U.S. on the East Coast and the West Coast. That's where all the foreigners are. They're coming into or going out of the United States, and they're also transiting the U.S. like from Europe to Japan. So if they wanted foreigners, they were at those 11 points, not the other 80 some across the country with the population. And had been trying to deny this. At any rate, so that's and the implication really is what I've been saying from the very beginning. This is a move towards a totalitarian state. This is a totalitarian process. We're moving into a dictatorial state, a state where the state now owns everything and controls everything. So Ronald Reagan used to say we were a country with a government. I say now we're a government with a country. And that's been the objective here, to control all the events. What the population's doing is population control. That's what the Stasi was all about. And I keep quoting, Wolfgang Schmidt, the former East German Stasi lieutenant colonel, who, when he reviewed, I think this came out in Reuters in August of 2013 after the Snowden material came out. And he said there, or it was the Washington Post, one of the publications anyway, it's on the web, people can find it. He said, when it came to the NSA program, he said, for us, this would have been a dream come true.
And that's absolutely what's evidenced in the documents. They have Global Economic Security Day, where they facilitate and network with to perpetuate all the economic spying, which they then, I see, what's his face from CrowdStrike when he was still at the FBI, Sean Henry, doing a talk on stage at DEFCON, where he blatantly says, we don't spy for economic reasons. We only spy for national security. Of course we don't spy for economic reasons. And then here's the NSA documents from Snowden showing like all this vast network of economic spying that's going on a daily basis. The point I was really trying to get to in terms of Julian is that we've seen, in terms of Snowden, presidential planes being grounded in the hunt for him. We learned that there were grab teams stationed in, I believe, Amsterdam for an extended period of time, just in the vain hope that they would be able to get their hands on Snowden. But what is the impact on that for Julian? How does that interrelate with things like the Vault 7 releases and WikiLeaks' other work in this time frame to where we're at right now with Julian in the embassy?
Well, you see, this is exposing, basically this discussion's about all of the monies involved in all of these programs and agencies and around the world. There's so much behind us, so much in terms of money and finance and employment and the constituents and satisfaction and cooperation, illegal cooperation between the governments. That an exposure of this could bring down all these governments, or they would view it that way. Certainly they should all, in my country, we should impeach half of them anyway. So, and then indict them. That's my point. But, and that's what they're afraid of. So it's the idea of blocking the sunlight and stopping it. And anybody who's involved in that, because there's so much involved here, becomes an extreme threat, and they have to attack them and smash them. Otherwise, there'll be another one pop up, and if you don't make sure you make an example of them, this is why they're continuing to go after Julian, I'm sure. I mean, otherwise, he's no different than a lot of other publishers who published things down through the years that have been classified. That's the same thing could happen to them too. Well, it gets at our First Amendment, which is, the free press, telling what the government's really doing to the people so they understand what's being done on their behalf. Right now, we get fed a lie almost all the time, or a manipulated partial truth. So that, people think, well, our government's still they're good guys. We're the good guys, that we don't do anything wrong or evil. When in fact, we, under the table and in secret, we're doing some really nasty stuff. So Julian is a big threat to them. He's telling the truth and he doesn't buckle. He keeps going with the truth, basically giving raw data too, so that people can make up their own minds. That is a real threat to them.
And you say, they must make an example of him, they must smash him, and yet it's been 8 years since he was put on the Pentagon manhunt list, and it wouldn't take them 8 years to get their hands on most people that they want to get their hands on. It's quite a unique set of circumstances that it's been 8 years and for WikiLeaks to still be publishing through nearly all of that is quite remarkable. Technology seems to have been the method by which WikiLeaks was able to protect sources, but also the method by which WikiLeaks was able to keep publishing, and the method by which Julian has been able to continue to operate to this point. So is technology like the one vector that we have is it the hope, is the hope in even though we're being violated every day by the technology, is there hope in technology?
Yes, there is still a hope in technology, and I'm trying to help along some of that with the work I'm doing in Amsterdam with the pretty good knowledge, a company we're starting over there to try to invent ways of being able to do that. But the real problem still is that there are so many people involved, and technology really is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good. It can also be used for bad. As in the case of the programs I left with NSA, they turned those to bad. So you can use that, like it gave them unlimited capability to manage large amounts of data. I mean, we actually saw no limit to the numbers of data or amount of data that we could take in and the numbers of transactions that we could do. We were doing trillions of them at the time, and we saw no mathematical limit on it. So, but we tried to build in protections. One of the things we did was we were working on monitoring our network to see who was coming into the network and who was doing what, where, and when. As they came in, every time you do something down a network, it sends a line of code down. Here comes a code from this particular IP or this device, and then you execute that. And here comes another line and so on. But all these devices are doing this simultaneously and they get mixed up in the log, so you have to sort it out. But once you do that, you can monitor, and we were going to do this with software, and we had started it. We were going to monitor everybody on the network, when they were on, what they were doing, as they did it. This meant that we would have, if Snowden, for example, would have been on the network at the time and tried to download material, we would see him doing and notify people at the time that he was doing that. So but it also gave us the capability to do things like, find which analysts needed what kind of training, because you could see how they were operating and see that they were weak in certain areas or needed some training in other areas that might help them do their job. But you could also see all the management, what they were doing with money from contract and movements of contracts, and also what programs were succeeding, which ones were failing, what's the return on investment from all of this. And so we had two, originally, I was implementing this in the SARC. So we were kind of a little independent thing and we could just go off and do our own thing. So I was doing it there. Originally, I'd proposed it with Dr. John Taggart back in 1992, 91, 92, somewhere around that range. We called that program Well Grounded. So we do it for all of NSA, for the entire worldwide network of NSA. And we could do that from our own spaces in the SARC and be able to tell anybody what was happening anywhere in the world at the time and how the programs, all of them, were doing. There were like 2,000 different programs they were running. But we had two groups opposing us. One were the analysts. They came out and said, you mean to tell me you're going to be monitoring every stroke I make on the computer board and everything I do with data and all that? And we said, yeah, we'll do that. And we can help you if you're weak in certain areas or we think that something might help, we can refer you to that. You can look at that and improve your job. They said, well, let me put it this way. I'll do my job, you do yours, you leave me alone. Don't bother me. But the real opposing group was the management in NSA. You mean to tell me you'll be able to see all this return on investment, every program, money moving around from one point to the other, from one program to another, and then all this data will be available to Congress to review? We said, sure. And they said, you are never going to do this program. And that's why they had no monitoring program at all when Snowden downloaded this material. That's why they have such a difficult time knowing what he took.
Wow, so they're really, because this is something else that we'd suspected but not been able to prove in our Decipher reporting, was that they are adverse to the implementation of any audit. They don't like audit trails.
Right.
Right,
exactly
that they want to avoid the audit trails at any cost.
That's because of the criminal action of money and moving of money around in violation of the law. They're given money for certain programs, and when they move it from one to the other, that's not supposed to happen. That's not legal. Okay.
So we saw that in terms of money, but also in terms of data. The audit trail in terms of data and moving data. And then we saw a very fascinating document where it was the first instance we found of an NSA employee openly complaining about something that was being done. And he was complaining about the transition from traditional reporting to database reporting, where he was being told not, we want information on Suzie Dawson, please write a report after you spy on her and give us the report. But we want information on Suzie Dawson's internet service provider and give us their entire database. Thank you very much. We don't need your report. Just give us the whole data, all the data. And this analyst was saying, well, what's our job then if we don't have to analyze it? All we're doing is collecting these giant troves of data and just handing them over to the customers. Why are we doing this? And that was really fascinating for us. And we were trying to puzzle out, why are they doing this? And we realized that by doing that, they were obscuring. They were able to obscure who and what they were targeting and for what purpose or reason.
Yep, and then in secret, they could do anything they wanted. That's exactly what they do with the NSLs over here in the United States, national security letters, the FBI issues. Give us all your data on all your people. That's what some of the people who objected it to finally complained, and it made a case in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in the New York area. That was in early 2015 that the ruling came out from the Second Circuit saying that this whole process that the FBI was doing with NSLs is unconstitutional. So that meant that the FBI never opposed it. They didn't appeal it to the Supreme Court for fear if they lose again, then everybody across the country will know it's unconstitutional. If they didn't say anything, then it was only a ruling in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and that won't go so far. So they could still issue national security letters, and people will obey them, not knowing that it's unconstitutionally ruled by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. So if they don't know that, they'll still comply. So let's keep doing it that way. We won't raise it to the issue of the Supreme Court, so it won't be publicly known around the country. So that way they can continue, and they still do it, knowing it's unconstitutional.
And now I'm just thinking that what Julian and WikiLeaks is doing is database reporting as well.
Exactly.
They're taking the database and handing it to the public, whereas the NSA is taking the database and handing it to the customer.
Well, yeah, in many cases, they are the customer too. They're monitoring everybody that's involved with them. So, but yeah, and the point is that by doing that, then the public gets the truth as to what they're really doing and what's happening on their behalf. Right now, they're just ignorant and uninformed, and it's the intent of the government to do that so that they can manipulate them any way they want. And some of their strongest accessories to that process are the mainstream media. They're the ones who are doing nothing but going along with them and regurgitating the things they want to be regurgitated instead of challenging anything. They don't challenge anything. They don't try to probe or do any investigative reporting, especially when it comes to national security. That's too sensitive. You don't want to go there. You don't want to talk about any of that. So it's too sensitive to the government.
Unfortunately, the majority of NatSec journalists, as they call themselves, consider their role to be taking what the national security state tells them and reporting it, and then calling it national security reporting, when unfortunately it is nothing like it.
If you have anybody in the national security area open their mouth to give them any public statements, 80% chance they're lying outright. The other 20% is a manipulated lie.
Absolutely, if not outright psyop. And yet again, WikiLeaks is, that hot knife through that butter. Because it's verified information. It's in terms of databasing, right? We're always wanting like data integrity. This is like the big thing with database administration. You want 100% data integrity, and you can never really get 100% data integrity. WikiLeaks actually has 100% data integrity.
That's right.
That's extremely.
That's the way I look at it too. Yeah, you get the raw data, especially when I see all the material from Edward Snowden, the raw data. I look at the raw data. I don't look at anybody's interpretation of it because I can understand what the raw data is saying. I don't need somebody's opinion, right? Because I know what the diagrams are telling me. So I also know all the programs behind them. So that helps.
That's why me getting to talk to you is so exciting, Bill, because I've read through those documents and I probably understand 60%. And there are certain things that stick with me because I've never been inside a military structure. I've never worked for the government. So I have a software development background. So I have enough technical chops to be able to decipher a lot of the technical terms, but I don't have the government experience. So quite often we would stumble over things and we would be like, we know this is important, but we don't understand fully why it's important yet. And that's why I've been bringing these things up with you here tonight. Isn't actually to blow my own whistle. It's to fill in those gaps. It's to fill in the gaps in my understanding. It really is. It's been so special for that reason. I deeply appreciate the opportunity. As much as I would love to keep you here, we have to continue on with the program. I would like to know, we often ask our guests, do you have any words for Julian in the event that he gets, because I know he would love this conversation, I know that for a fact. In the event that he does ever get to see it, what would your message to him be?
I would just say, Julian, hang in there. We wish you the best. We'll support you as best we can publicly, and do the best we can to influence governments to do the right thing here instead of the evil side of the governments being the strong point. I mean, they need to really begin to understand what they're doing, what that means to their society, and the countries in general, not just in the UK but also in the US. I mean, after all, they would trumped up charges to begin with to get him incarcerated in some way, so they could ship him off to the US for this, 1917 espionage act they wanted him to apply to him. So just hang in there, Julian. We're still rooting for you, and we'll do the best we can for you.
And that's a message from one of the world's top whistleblowers to a protector of whistleblowers, and that's an extremely special thing. Thank you. So I'm kind of cuddling you right now. Thank you so much, Bill. You've been wonderful to have on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.